talk about general sort of frameworks of international relations theory. Now, if you've taken Miss Goulden's IR class or her human geo class, then you probably have some reference for this. But generally speaking, international relations studies or international relations theory as a field works a little bit differently than most of the fields that you are used to. At this point in your education, there is like a hard delineation for the most part between science and humanities. That does not exist as you get further and further into your academic career. We have what are called these soft sciences. I have a lot of problems with that particular term, whatever. The point is that they are still scientific pursuits and or scientific studies, but that take a range of different types of data as opposed to your humanities classes being all very interpretation-based and being very qualitative, and your science classes being very quantitative-based. There is plenty of in-the-middle room, and that is where the entirety of the field of international relations exists. So, first we need to orient ourselves. First thing, when we say international relations theories, we do not mean theories like a science theory. This is not like the theory of gravity. It's not like this is a set of facts or things that you definitely have to hold to be true. It is more like a set of tools that you will use to examine the world. So, when we talk about realism and liberalism, that should not be taken as these are facts about life. It should be taken, okay, these are different ways that I may interpret international events, and those different interpretations will give me different information.
Like lens.
And so,
Like lens.
Yes, we'll get to lenses is my favorite way to view theories.
Sorry, there. Okay.
So, good working definition of theories. A set of systematic, informed hunches about the way things work. So, systematic. What do we mean by that?
They're like, you're not just like randomly guessing at each step of how to apply the theory.
We'll say that that's more well-informed. They can't just be guesses.
I mean, like even if you like have a theory that isn't just a guess, it's like you apply it in a way that's systematic, as opposed to making up on the fly what you're trying to do.
Yes, and so if I have this set of well-informed hunches about how I think the world works, it means they get applied in the same way every time. And it also means that most theories have a goal of being able to explain or interpret most things in the most correct way. And so obviously no theory is 100%, cannot 100% explain everything that happens in international relations. Then we wouldn't have theories anymore. We would have one right answer. But that's not how anything works, especially when we're working with humans. And so there are three different kinds of ways to view theories. This is true of a lot of sort of academic disciplines that exist in the middle of your far to the interpretive side humanities courses and your far to the objective side science courses. Is these different theories about how humans work, so like this applies to like psychology, it applies to communication studies, it applies to international relations. These are different ways that we can view theories. So some people prefer to view theories as nets. I am trying to capture as much of the picture as I possibly can. A few things might fall out here and there, but they're like small fish, and so we don't care. We just care about getting the overall bulk of the picture. This is oftentimes the way that more objective international relations theories will think. It doesn't matter if we can't explain literally everything, if we can explain the bulk of things, that's good enough. Next, we can view theories as maps. Now, maps mean that we are trying to get from point A to point B. And so these theories are trying to be predictive. That is true of most interpretive and objective theories, is they are trying to be predictive to at least some degree. And so they are trying to say, okay, based on what we know about what we think we know about how the world works, so based on our set of systemic informed hunches, then what does that mean for the future of XYZ event? And so if I'm a realist, I will have different predictions about the conflict in Ukraine than I will if I am, say, a constructivist. Now, my preferred way to look at theories, because I don't think that because I am not a very objectively oriented IR scholar, I think that most of the theories have at least something correct about them. And so I think instead we should view theories as lenses. So like if you, say, are going to a 3D movie, what kind of glasses do they give you?
3D glasses.
What do they look like?
Yeah, blue on one side, red on one side, and there's like two images, and one of them slightly shifted, and one of your eyes sees one of them, the other eye sees the other one, and they look parallax, and they're kind of annoying, and sometimes they don't work.
Yes. Basically, you are given two separate colors of lenses, and together they form a single picture. Now, if you cover up one of the eyes of the 3D glasses, then you will see the two-dimensional color-shifted image. Same thing if you cover up the other eye. So this is the way that we can sometimes think of international relations theory, is I'm going to put on my realism glasses, or I'm going to put on my liberalism glasses, and try and understand this course of events from a realist or liberal perspective.
So it's like being centrist.
No, because usually the glasses I wear are Marxist glasses, but putting on other glasses can assist you with gaining more information and or potentially gaining insight into how other people think. Because if, for example, the leader of, say, Cuba is a Marxist, he's aware that not all international relations leaders are Marxists. And so if he wants to try and understand the people he's working with, more likely than not, he's going to have to stick on his realism glasses, especially if he's talking to somebody from the West, or potentially his liberalism glasses, that sort of stuff. And so that means that like different theories will always leave out some information and will always let us see some information that other theories will not. And so, in my personal opinion, for like real life applications of all this stuff, you have to look at things from multiple perspectives. Otherwise, you're just going to be missing some information. For debate purposes, this is super helpful when trying to figure out what your K-links are going to be. Because you need to put on the security studies lenses, the feminist lenses, etc., in order to properly look at an affirmative and decide, okay, what would a feminist international relations perspective have to say about this particular affirmative? And you can do the same thing when you are affirmative. And so say, okay, I know this team goes for security K a lot, let me put on my security K glasses and try and figure out what the links are going to be. That way I can start working on that stuff before the 2AC. Questions, comments, concerns? All that make sense? Alright. So, all theories make assumptions. And that's okay. Like, there's not a different way to, like, exist in the world. We have to make some assumptions. So, as I've alluded to, we've been talking a lot about, like, objective versus interpretive theories. So some theories in international relations exist more on the objective side. They're trying to look for data, they're trying to look for numbers, facts, histories, etc., objective events that did happen. And then trying to use those to formulate a theory. Now that is not to say that interpretive theories are just like off in no man's land. But the interpretive side of the situation questions how much of objective reality we can ever know and how objective humans can really be. And so the sort of criticism from an interpretive perspective of a more objective theory might be that you're lying to yourself. You can never actually be objective. And by pretending to be objective, you're then not examining those biases. And so you are far more likely to come out with biased information. It also means the types of information that interpretive theories take into account can be a little bit different. And so if we were to say have a phenomenological account of a history or an event, so that's like a first-person perspective from somebody who was there, that would be maybe a single data point in a very large set of data points. For somebody on the more objective side, they'd be like, okay, that's like one thing. There were like 100,000 people involved in this incident. How much do we really care about it? Whereas somebody on the more interpretive side might say, it's not that we can't glean things from all of this objective data, but it's perhaps not as valuable as this first-person perspective of what happened. And so it's just about what kinds of data and information these theories value. Now this gets into the epistemology of each theory. And epistemology is, again, how do we know what we know if we know it at all? According to objective theories, we can definitely know things, and we should try to, in order to make predictions about the future. According to interpretive theories, we can definitely know things. Whether those things are quote-unquote capital T true is really up for debate. But based on the things that we can know, we can take certain actions to make people's lives better or worse. And this also gets into the determinism versus free will debate. Now, for a lot of what we get into with the more objective theories, some of them sound awfully deterministic. If X, Y, Z things happens, then A, B, C things will happen. And it sounds a lot like humans don't maybe have the most free will in the whole world. Whereas when you get to the interpretive side, a lot of the times that's based on like the choices that people make, and we assume that people could have made different choices. Now obviously those things are not necessarily mutually exclusive. We can say, sure, somebody had a choice in this given situation, but given these circumstances, who would make a different choice? That doesn't make sense. And so it's not like these are either-or questions. They exist in kind of this like matrix of information. And then finally, we've got different goals for each of our theories. So the goal of objective theories is to find the capital T truth about the world. That is the goal. According to interpretive theories, we can definitely know things, and we should try to. In order to make predictions about the future. According to objective theories, we can definitely know things, and we should try to. The goal for more interpretive theories is emancipation, trying to make individual people's lives better. Now, again, these two things are not either or, and they don't exist purely at opposite ends of the spectrum. We can kind of have a coexistence of these things. But the degree to which each of these things matters is going to be more or less important based on how objective or interpretive a theory is. Any questions, comments, concerns? All right. So if we get into what exactly an objective theory is going to try and do, first thing it's going to try and do is it's going to try to explain data. That is the most important thing for an objective theory to do. I have been given a set of data. I have been given this set of data about the frequency of conflicts in the Middle East from 2000 to 2020. How do I explain that? Or what explanation encompasses this data? Predicting future events. This is the most important thing for policymakers especially, and it's kind of the way that international relations will market itself to its university to ensure that the department doesn't get shut down. Is part of the goal is to make our prediction of future events better so that we can avoid cataclysmic events like war. They also opt for simplicity. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously international relations is very complicated, but sometimes the simplest explanation is the best one. And so trying to make everything unnecessarily complicated or convoluted is sometimes not great. They also need to be practically useful. What does this add to people who are actually doing things in the international sphere? What knowledge does this give them to help them move forward? And there is a more explicit focus on quantitative research. Now, when we say quantitative research in international relations studies, we may or may not mean the kind of quantitative research that we're used to in, say, a chemistry class, where you're doing titrations, and so you're looking at X percentages and all that good stuff. It may very well count things like number of wars in the Middle East between between 2000 and 2020, but it's more likely than not going to have to make some interpretations of that data instead of it just being merely counting, running some statistical variances, and calling it a day. Make sense? All right, so interpretive approaches. Again, not to be understood as a complete opposite thing necessarily, but just some differences that we need to understand. So the goal of interpretive approaches is usually to give us a new understanding of something. So yes, we can interpret this data one way, but it's probably a more complicated picture than that. So what kind of new interpretations of this data can we get in order to help us better understand how international relations functions as a whole? And it should help us clarify our values. So by taking, say, a feminist interpretation of security studies, one of the things that we can look at is that oftentimes there are some seriously masculine values in international relations. And we'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about feminism specifically. But the clarification of those values is then what can aid in the reform of society, which we'll get to in a second. But we also need to establish some kind of community of agreement. And so it's not that our interpretation should be just anything and everything under the sun, even if it doesn't make any sense. The goal is some sort of expertise consensus. That yes, a lot of people have seen this take and they think that it's not just a hot take, but it's a good hot take. And thus, that should all lead us towards making society a better place for everybody. And oftentimes here we'll have more of an inclusion of qualitative research. And there will be an emphasis placed on qualitative research over quantitative research. Any questions about this? All right, and so this is just to give you a little bit of an idea of where all of these things might fit. Now, one of the things that's important to understand about my perspective on international relations is I don't see any theory of international relations as mutually exclusive necessarily with any other theory. There are some theories that are pretty mutually exclusive. But 9 times out of 10, one theory can be taken into context with multiple other theories. Now, not everybody agrees. That is definitely my perspective as somebody who sees theories as lenses. If you see theories as nets or maps, then trying to combine multiple theories means that you're never going to catch any fish and you're never going to get where you're trying to go. And so that's one important thing to keep in mind. When we study the realists, most realists see their theory of international relations as the capital T truth. It's the correct one. and it should not be combined with any other theories lest you water it down and decrease its capital T truth value. And this is certainly by no means an exhaustive list of international theories. There are tons out there, and if you're interested in other theories after we're finished talking about this, there's a great textbook that I can send you that's fairly accessible for high school students. And so then, also, no theory is right, no matter what individuals of that theory may say. And I'm pretty comfortable making that statement because, again, if any of them were right, we wouldn't have more than one. So over here on the objective side, we have realism, liberalism, and game theory. Game theory is like not necessarily mutually exclusive with either of these two things. It mostly just is a way that different people might act in different situations. And so if you've heard of the prisoner's dilemma, where you have like two prisoners that are separated or being questioned by police officers, and the police officers tell each of them that the other one has already tattled on each other. But if you tell on your friend, then maybe we'll commute your sentence. And the most advantageous situation is for neither prisoner to talk, because then nobody gets any information and they can't be put in jail in the first place. And if one of them talks and the other one doesn't, well then that one is getting a much better deal. But if both of them talk, now the cops have information on both of them. And game theorists think that both of them talking is the most likely option. And so then we get kind of in the middle here. And so feminism is a complicated one, and we'll get into that one specifically just because like it's had some appropriations through like Western imperial feminism that mean it doesn't fit nearly as nicely on our spectrum as lots of the other theories do. But you've got constructivism, Marxism, post-colonialism that are all looking at often very like hardcore like quantitative data, as well as some qualitative data, and trying to reason the two of them to try and make reforms to civil society. And then the further over we get, we have things like post-structuralism as well as queer theory that are more interested with challenging our notions of reality to begin with. And saying we can't ever produce a valuable theory because like we don't even understand our reality. We don't understand our world. How can we possibly produce a decent theory to explain it? Does that kind of make sense? And so we'll talk about some of these. We will not have time to talk about all of them in just a couple of weeks of class that we have left. But this is just to give you a sort of like orientation, because we'll start clear over here with realism and we'll end over here with queer theory. And so, no, that's not correct anymore. That's fine. You change your mind a lot about different lesson plans. So we will cover realism and liberalism. We'll cover Marxism kind of briefly just because we've talked so much about Marxism with this group already. So we'll just do some reminders, how does this apply to international relations, that kind of stuff. We'll then talk about feminism and queer theory. We'll talk about them together because queer theory is like an offshoot of feminism and holds a lot of the same assumptions that a lot of more radical feminists hold. And then we'll, instead of postmodernism, what we'll probably do are security studies specifically, just because like the security K is going to be like the K next year. It's going to be the one you hear like every debate, no matter how policy the team reading it is. And so it's one of the things that we want to cover because it's like an important, going to be in every kind of round situation. And one of the things that you'll notice very quickly when we cover security studies it is probably the least mutually exclusive theory. Most of the things that security studies says can be true, and also the things that liberals say can be true. Also the things that constructivists say can be true. Also the things that feminists say can be true, etc. And you'll see something similar happening with feminism if you get into the literature base this summer, if you're interested in reading feminism on this topic, is you'll see like feminist security studies. It's just like its own little thing that already exists. You'll see Marxist feminism, you'll see post-colonial feminism, that kind of stuff. And so oftentimes anything that's based on an identity, like post-colonialism, feminism, queer theory, etc., can be combined with other types of international relations topics. And I think that it will kind of depend on the makeup of your labs, but one of the things that's happened over the course of the past couple of years is anti-blackness has just become a less popular argument overall, which is very weird to me. I'm not really sure why this happened. My best guess is it's because of COVID, and so like the information dissemination that happens in the debate community is not getting done to the degree that it often does. And so whether or not anti-blackness ends up being a central part of next year's topic is sort of up for debate. My guess is if the Wake lab ends up only putting anti-blackness arguments out, then it will still be a thing. And anti-blackness is very much going to take a post-colonial perspective on a lot of this stuff. So like Fanon, which we talked about kind of briefly. That's where Fanon exists, is like as a critique of imperialism. And so that's where a lot of the anti-blackness like literature is going to come from. it's not dissimilar to say like the Marxist literature. The Marxist literature in international relations is mostly concerned with anti-imperialism. And so that's where you're going to find a lot of the critical theory stuff. It's just anti-imperialism. And so that's not to say that you should like try and Frankenstein those arguments together. I think that international relations topics have some of the worst kinds of Franken-Ks, where people will just take like a feminist link and like a colonialism impact or like a Marxism alt and they'll call it a day. Please don't do that. Just because like if you take, it's not that those things can't be combined. Like there is something sort of inherently Marxist about post-colonial feminism, but it is a question about whether the authors have done that synthesis in their own research. Because if you take somebody like, say, Ann Tickner, you won't, because I won't let you. Ann Tickner is sort of the definition of an imperial feminist. She is very much a fan of the United States, say, going into Africa to make sure that we can stop female genital mutilation in Africa. Like, she's that kind of feminist. We're just like, yeah, imperialism is fine as long as you're protecting women, then it's fine. And so, like, she does not jive well with, say, a Marxist perspective on international relations. And so then if you try to take a Tickner card and like a general, like an Escalante card, Escalante is first of all not talking about international relations, and so that's not a very good alternate on this topic to begin with, and then like Escalante and Tickner definitely would not get along, and so you run into these kind of like issues.
Franken-K's monster.
Yes. And so none of these theories are necessarily mutually exclusive, but that doesn't mean that individual authors or individual canons within these theories aren't mutually exclusive. And so that is definitely something to keep in mind. And it's one of the reasons I kind of want to give you an orientation towards these things before you run off and do your camp research, especially if you end up cutting a critique or answers to a critique in camp at any point. Because you should be able to kind of look at somebody's international relations work. First of all, they should just tell you what their perspective is. That is just good academic stuff 101. Here's my methodology. Here's the lens I use, that kind of stuff. But hypothetically, they may be words that you've never heard before, but hopefully once you read the explanation of those words, then you can sort of fit them into one of these categories or fit them somewhere along our axis so that you kind of know what assumptions are being made by this author and what their goal is and what they value.